What's happening, guys? Jeremy Anderson here, and today I'm going to talk to you about Unifoil's new Evolution 155. Hey guys, real quick before we get started, this is a pretty long review, so to help you out and let you get to what you want to know, I've put the timestamp links in the description down below. So check those out. That way you can skip around and jump to the points that are going to be most interesting to you. Appreciate it. Let's jump back into things. All right, so a few things I want to do to level set before we jump into the review. So first, a few things about me, the conditions I'm riding in, and the typical setup I use when I'm using the Evo 155. So first off, I'm about 170 pounds or about 77 kilograms. I'm typically foiling anywhere from knee to waist high conditions. Swell periods typically 6 to 8 seconds here in Central Florida, so definitely on the weaker side. We do occasionally get swell events that go up into the 10 to 12 second interval, but that's fairly rare. So most of those days are going to be in that short period wind swell type conditions. As far as my overall setup, I'm typically riding the Evolution 155 with the Progression 800 mast, the short aluminum fuse, and typically the Progression 14.5 inch tail. Also, I'm typically on a 4.5 prone board, as probably 90% of my sessions are prone sessions, with the odd shore runner thrown in as well. So something else I want to bring up is how I see the Evo 155 fitting into my quiver. So leading up to having this foil, I was kind of bouncing back and forth between the Progression 140 and the Progression 200. Progression 140 is my go-to when it's solid waist high or bigger. And then the Progression 200 was what I would jump on basically from essentially flat or doing dock starts up to about waist high, particularly on small shore runner days or just days where it was extremely gutless and I needed a lot of lift early to get up and riding. The Progression 200 is a great foil, has a ton of lift and has a really slow stall speed. But for me, I wanted something that I could push a little bit faster, particularly in shore runner conditions, and also was going to be a little bit more maneuverable on the roll axis, because the Progression 200 at my weight takes a little bit more effort than I'd like to carve through turns and just in general make quick changes throughout a ride. All right, so with those things said, I've had about 2 months on the Evo 155, so let's go ahead and jump into the review. So one of the first things I noticed right away is that the foil creates a lot of lift for its size. Not that launch you out of the water lift either, but a nice progressive roll-in as you start to take off. So the foil really just has a nice uniform addition of lift as you're rolling down the wave face. It makes for, in my opinion, a fairly easy takeoff. It works quite well from knee high, up to that waist high zone. If you get into a little bit bigger surf, into chest high, at least at my weight, that starts to become a little bit more challenging, but you still don't feel like you're going to get ejected like you do say on a Progression 200 in the same size conditions. The big difference, particularly with the 155 versus the 200, of course, is that the foil is quite a bit faster. But you definitely feel it in that it's much slicker feeling through the water. And that's to be expected because obviously it's a much smaller foil just from an overall surface area perspective. But it's also a thinner foil section as well, which makes that foil, like I said, real slick through the water. It's a significant change down in size, so I don't think that's going to be a shock to anybody, but it's worth noting. Another thing I noticed pretty quickly is that the pitch stability improvement made with the Evo 155, and I'm sure this applies across all the Evo line, is that there's a lot more pitch stability built into this foil. Whereas the Progression series that I've ridden seem to, as they approach sort of their max speed for given size, really start to have less and less pitch control. So far, the Evo 155, in my experience, has remained relatively pitch stable throughout the entire speed range that I've had it in. And I've used the foil now on everything from knee high up to some pretty solid chest high days, particularly on shore runners where I have a long continuous time on the foil. So that's great, particularly on those long rides, whether you're doing shore runners or downwinders, because you're not having to use the stabilizer muscles in your legs and you're not really burning yourself out, which is nice. Just makes obviously for a much more comfortable, less energy sapping ride, and allows you to kind of relax and keep your strength throughout the duration. Something else I noticed about the foil early on is that it still maintains really good roll control throughout the speed range. At the top end, just like any other foil, you're going to have to burn off some speed before you roll it over. At least any foil that's got some span, like the Evo 155 does. But in general, I feel like I'm able to go ahead and commit to rolling it over at higher speed relative to its size than I was with the progressions. Feeling more stable and generally more in control throughout the turn. So that's been really good just for your overall confidence riding the foil, and allows you to just commit harder throughout your session. Another key trait that I really noticed coming from the progression line over to this Evo is that the foil has a lot of glide. It feels way slicker through the water than the progression line, and I think that's probably because it has a thinner foil section than the progression lines do. Having said that, it also means that it's got a little bit higher stall speed than a progression that would be a relatively close size to the Evo. And when the foil does start to get slow and get close to that stall range, it doesn't have any weird tendencies to drop out one wingtip or the other. It's a nice slow sink back into the water. So you do have, if you're high on the mast, the ability to kind of grave dig out and keep it going, but it's something you have to be more mindful of. Again, if you're coming from a progression foil that's of close size to what the Evo is that you just picked up. As I mentioned in the beginning, I do use this foil for some shore runners. And one of the things I did notice is that this foil really does a good job of picking up the smallest bump energy and really kind of giving you a boost when you need it. It also is really good at accelerating and overtaking bumps for its size. I was actually really surprised at how efficient it was compared to a progression of a given size. You don't seem to run into a wall near the top end like you do with a progression. So that's definitely a big improvement there. I know the Downwind guys down the coast from me, folks like Matt Gudwin, have been using it quite a bit for their Downwind sends and are really liking the foil a lot. So highly recommend, if you're considering it for Downwind, check out some of Matt Gudwin's content. And he's provided his thoughts on using the foil for downwind conditions. As far as overall maneuverability goes, this foil actually turns really well in a particular speed range. I wouldn't say that you're going to do a lot of turns going really fast on this foil, because it is a fairly straight leading edge and it's pretty spanny. My experience, when you're on the slower end of its speed range, I'd say 14, 15 miles an hour slower, you can really lean it over and crank through a turn and, use your back foot a lot. So almost like a surf style turn to really push the foil around, and it'll respond and give you a lot of drive through that turn, and a lot of speed out of the exit. So for me, with a surf background, that's a really familiar feeling, and I have enjoyed it a lot, especially on those smaller days, being able to crank through turns and kind of get that surf style feeling that you might get when you're on a thruster carving through a turn. So we've talked a little bit about where the foil excels, how I've set it up, and in the conditions I typically use it in. So with all those things in mind, maybe we should talk a little bit about where I wouldn't want to use this foil, or the type of approach that I think wouldn't work really well with it. So one of the things to consider, as we take a look at the foil here, is it is a pretty wide span. So if you're thinking you're going to go out and surf really tight in the pocket and really steep waves, it's probably not going to be the foil you want. You're going to want to go with something that's less span and generally a little more curvy. Again, slower stuff, more flat-faced waves, you can definitely crank turns on this foil and it'll respond, but you're not going to be doing critical turns in the pocket. So it's just not what it's designed for. So I wouldn't even try to force it. It's just not going to be the foil that you want for that. Also, I wouldn't say it's necessarily a great foil for a beginner. It does have a little bit thinner foil cross section. It's very high aspect. So for somebody who's just getting started, I'd recommend maybe starting with one of the progression foils, one of the larger progressions. You could start with an Evolution as well, one of the bigger ones, like the 175 or the 205. But my personal opinion, you might have better luck on one of the progressions, just because they seem to have a little bit lower stall speed for their given size and maybe a little bit more forgiving in that context. All right, so to wrap things up, Really stoked to have the Evo 155 as part of my quiver. It's my daily driver in those really small days when we're talking like sub knee high up to waist high. Tons of glide, which I love, and still maintains the ability to crank turns, especially if you've got a fairly slopey wave where you're able to just really lean into it and crank on that back foot. Again, not going to be a foil you're going to ride in really steep pockets on super punchy waves. But if you're foiling a lot of days and sort of low energy stuff, or you're doing shore runners, or even downwinders on days where it's not necessarily nuking like 40, 50 miles an hour, but kind of those like 20 to maybe up to 30 mile an hour days, I think it's going to be a great foil to have in your quiver. Highly recommend it. Of course, make sure that you always support your local foil dealers. For me, here in Central Florida, in Brevard County on the East Coast, that's going to be Goodbreeze. So definitely, if you're in this area, check those guys out. But of course, you can always check out Unifoil's website as well. They'll give you a list of all their dealers where you can go check these foils out firsthand, and they can help you find the perfect size for you. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you found this informative. Let me know, and stoked to share the information about the Evo 155.